Dear friends, it's a pleasure as always to welcome you to Goddard Chapel and to our annual university celebration of the life and the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. King is a deep inspiration to so many of us of how a life of moral conviction is led, honed in a tradition and in partnership with others that can go on to make dramatic positive social change in the face of the most catastrophic experiences of human suffering. In King's case, the realities of white supremacy and racism, from the time of slavery to Jim Crow, to the many aftershocks of these scourges, which continue their ripple effects in our society even today. I recently saw, as many of you surely have, the excellent new film, Selma, and I was reminded of the courageous and powerful, loving and transformative work of Dr. King in the face of the most degrading and dehumanizing conditions. I was reminded of his dignity, his commitment, his savvy and his strategy, as well as the doubts and uncertainties, the personal story and the networks that also shaped his extraordinary life and mission. We hope that today's commemoration and celebration will be an opportunity for all of us, not only to remember and honor Dr. King and his particular vision and values and mission, but also for each of us to be reminded of and to recommit to the fact that each of us has a calling and unique gifts and a unique position and unique ways in which we can make the world better for others. On Monday, 60 or so of us, students and staff, engaged in our first ever, and I hope our first annual, MLK Day of Service at several nonprofit organizations that support the poor and the homeless in the Boston area. Not only did we serve, but we learned and we built relationships with neighbors and with organizations that I hope will continue long into the future. Those of us who work together at Bagley, the Boston Alliance for LGBT Youth, were given a t-shirt with a picture of Dr. King and the quotation, "What are you doing for others?" As we enter into our celebration today, I can think of no better question for us to ponder as we think about our work in this academic community and beyond. Dr. King's profound example as a spiritual and moral leader was to center his life and his work on the question, what are you doing for others? And he found many examples. My prayer is that today's celebration invites all of us to consider this question anew, and perhaps to find a new way in this new year, or to rededicate our energies already committed to living our lives more for others. Welcome all to today's celebration of Dr. King. Many thanks in advance to all who will offer their music and their poetry and their remarks today. And now would you please join me in welcoming Tufts President Anthony P. Monaco to offer his remarks on this celebratory moment.
Thank you, Greg. Welcome. I'm really pleased to join with you tonight in reflecting on the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Tonight's program continues a tradition at Tufts of working with students to help shape this annual celebration of a seminal figure in American history. I look forward to hearing from all who are taking part in tonight's program about how you interpret and apply the lessons of Dr. King so eloquently imparted. Through the spoken words of our students, we will hear Dr. King's views on poverty, peace, power, love, and action. These ideals for which Dr. King stood are enduring reminders of what we should aspire to as individuals, as a university community, and as a society. And not just on one day of the year, but on every day. Dr. King's dream is really about all of us and how we embrace his call to action in our daily lives. He used nonviolent protest to challenge the social inequalities of the 1950s and 1960s. His prescription for achieving change continues to resonate and inspire. The Tufts students who helped organize the Black Lives Matter protests last month embodied Dr. King's legacy by answering his call to nonviolent action. While the racial climate in this country has improved since Dr. King participated in the Montgomery bus boycott 60 years ago, the recent events in Ferguson and in New York City demonstrate that much more needs to be done. These issues are not easy. 50 years after Dr. King's death, we continue to struggle with achieving true equality for all members of our society. As an institution of higher education, we can advance Dr. King's legacy through teaching, learning, and informed debate about the complex issues around race in America. Important work on race and inequality is taking place on all of our campuses through the Council on Campus Diversity and other initiatives. On this campus, the debate is fostered by the Center for Study of Race and Democracy, the Consortium of Studies in Race, Colonialism, and Diaspora, and other important research and scholarship in which faculty and students are engaged. We must continue to dedicate ourselves to advancing the conversation that Dr. King started about race, about equality, about social justice. This is the torch that he urged all of us to carry. To further university-wide dialogue about race, inequality, and action, Provost David Harris is bringing together faculty and students to plan a series of events over the next few months to examine these issues on our campus. I encourage you to join with him in focusing these discussions. To achieve our collective potential as a community, we must embrace our differences and our different perspectives. That is at the core of what Dr. King stood for, and it is what strengthens us as an institution of higher education. It is also keeping with one of Tufts' highest aspirations, which is a commitment to active citizenship and societal impact. And it was nice to hear that on Mondays we did something about service. It is why all of us are here to make a difference in our community, in our country, and in the world. I will close tonight with a challenge that Dr. King issued to the audiences in Montgomery, Alabama in 1957. He said, and I quote, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" That question is as important for us today as it was for those who first heard his words more than 50 years ago. And I am eager to hear your answers. Thank you. I would now like to invite Katrina Moore, the director of the Africana Center, who's going to introduce the celebration. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Each year we gather to celebrate and remember the life and leadership of one of America's greatest activists. His was a legacy of equality, compassion, nonviolence, and peace. His inspired leadership during one of the most difficult times in American history helped to propel him to the status of a cultural icon. But I prefer to think of him as being an ordinary man who was called to do extraordinary things. Dr. King is well known for his role in the civil rights movement, but far fewer are aware of his focus on poverty, peace, and power during what would be the final year of his life. It was during this time that Dr. King became an outspoken protester of the Vietnam War, believing war is the enemy of the poor. His protest in the war lost him many allies. But Dr. King maintained that the war in Vietnam was a symptom of the world's shift towards becoming a thing-oriented society over a person-oriented society. He also received many death threats. He ended up being bankrupt, and he experienced many challenges of ordinary life that even led him to start to question his ability to continue in the movement. In his 1967 New York speech, Beyond Vietnam, Dr. King stated that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. As we now live in a world where families have weakened and become vulnerable to violence, drugs, war, economic stressors, infidelity, poor education, illness, and other external factors, let us be reminded to remain steadfast to Dr. King's call. And we have to hold on to the belief that we will one day fulfill his mission and goal of equity, compassion, and peace for all humankind. Dr. King's success as a leader is evidenced by his ability to listen to others and his guidance of a movement by encouraging creative, flexible viewpoints, inspiring action by working with people, and ensuring future success by emphasizing a hopeful, compassionate dream. While we do all like to think of Dr. King as the dreamer, let us also remember his last year and how he challenged us to examine our moral compass with his voice, his hands, and his heart. On behalf of the Office of the President, the University Chaplaincy, the Africana Center, the Multicultural Greek Council, Cape and Bible Study, and the Interfaith Student Council, it is our pleasure to welcome you as we honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and legacy through music, imagery, student performances, and inspiring remarks. And we are going to reflect on what it would mean to undergo a revolution of values.
Let it go. Good evening. I will read a quotation by Dr. King on poverty from one of his final speeches, Where Do We Go From Here? A host of positive psychological changes inevitably will result from widespread economic security. The dignity of the individual will flourish when the decisions concerning his life are in his own hands, when he has the assurance that his income is stable and certain, and when he knows that he has the means to seek self-improvement. Personal conflicts between husband and wife and children will diminish when the unjust measurement of human worth on a scale of dollars is eliminated. Now, our country can do this. John Kenneth Galbraith said that a guaranteed annual income could be done for about $20 billion a year. And I say to you today that if our nation can spend $35 billion a year to fight an unjust, evil war in Vietnam, and $20 billion to put a man on the moon, it can spend billions of dollars to put God's children on their own 2 feet right here on earth. In the Gospel according to Matthew, Jesus tells a story that comes to be known sheep and goats. In this illustration, a king comes to gather his followers. And in this illustration, the king represents Jesus, and the followers, who are sheep who are gathered to a side, to the right-hand side of Jesus, represent righteous people. And I'll read. Then the king will say to those on his right, the sheep, the righteous people, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world." Now, a good question to ask here is, what makes that distinction? Why are the righteous people righteous? I'll continue. "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Now, I'm confused. The righteous people couldn't understand how Jesus could say this, but they weren't physically helping him in this way. So then the righteous people will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" And Jesus responds. King will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Now, Jesus does something beautiful here. He takes on the identity of the wretched people of the earth. He becomes one with the marginalized and the impoverished, and tells his people, that which you do to them or fail to do for them, you also do to me or fail to do for me. And in essence, he cancels the debate and proves that the gospel and social justice aren't two separate entities, but are one and the same. When asked what the greatest commandment was, Jesus responded, saying, "Love the Father with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself." Now, I think I speak universally when I say none of us would wish poverty upon ourselves. And in the same way that we fight against it for ourselves, we too are called to fight against it on behalf of our fellow brethren. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Aviva. I'm a member of the Hillel Student Leadership and the Chaplaincy Interfaith Student Council. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the inaugural Day of Service, which Reverend McGonigal already mentioned, that was in honor of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and it happened this past Monday. It was headed up by teams from the Africana Center, Chaplaincy, and a variety of student groups, and focused on how we can be inspired by Dr. King's vision to end poverty in our own local community. We partnered with community organizations that address the pressing needs of individuals living in poverty or in homelessness near Tufts, and we sent out groups of students to volunteer at several local sites. Over 60 participants engaged in service work throughout the day. Tufts students were cooking and serving meals at the Harvard Square homeless shelter, helping create 300 care packages for young homeless individuals at the Boston Alliance of Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender Youth, and crafting homemade winter items with Many Helping Hands project in Central Square. As a participant during the day, I can say that the generous spirit of all the students serving together, as well as the really amazing commitment of the organizations who we served with, was very inspiring. And there are a few things as encouraging as seeing peers of mine hopping, smiling on a van at 5:15 in the morning on their day off to cook breakfast at a shelter. Really, the incredible swell of interest and support from the student body on this day showed that it can be truly only the beginning. We look forward to strengthening relationships with the community organizations where we served, as well as with other organizations, and to use this day as a launch pad for an annual tradition honoring Dr. King, as well as the beginning of meaningful community relationships for cooperation and action to solve issues of poverty. Personally, during my service experience on Monday, I was amazed to learn that the Harvard Square homeless shelter is 30 years old and one of the only shelters in the entire country that is entirely student-run. The expertise, warmth, and loving spirit of those students who staff the shelter every week and who we met there was deeply touching, and it made me really excited to think of what could be possible if we continued work together with groups from Tufts. This day couldn't have happened without the support of incredible staff at the Africana Center and the University Chaplaincy. We're really grateful to them for helping this day come together. Throughout the day, students, all of us, reflected upon the same very poignant quote that Reverend McGonigal and President Monaco have already brought to mind, which really challenges us to think deeply about what we're doing for others every day. And in looking forward to the continuation and expansion of this day as an annual tradition, we aspire to honor Dr. King's memory by constantly asking ourselves how we can serve more and how we can be serving more deeply. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nazifa. I'm from the Muslim Students Association, and so I'm here to talk about how our faith or belief system is related to the theme of peace. And so the quotation that we're supposed to talk on is, I'm concerned about, this is by Martin Luther King, I'm concerned about a better world. I'm concerned about justice. I'm concerned about brotherhood. I'm concerned about truth. And when one is concerned about that, he can never advocate violence. For through violence, you may murder a murderer, but you can't murder murder. Through violence, you may murder a liar, but you can't establish truth. Through violence, you may murder a hater, but you can't murder hate through violence. Darkness cannot put out darkness, only light can do that. So Islam is, a lot of people say Islam is, Islam means peace. It doesn't really mean peace, but Islam, have you guys ever heard of the word salam? It means peace in Arabic. And so Islam and salam have the same root. And whenever a Muslim sees another Muslim, they always say this one thing. They say, Assalamu alaikum. And that means peace be upon you. And then so when you hear someone say Assalamu alaikum, you say back, wa alaikum assalam, and peace be upon you too, or right? So what that, like, I always find that really, like, inspiring, sort of, because it kind of shows how in your day-to-day existence you're constantly wishing peace upon other people, right? And so what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to look your brother or sister of your faith in the eye and go, Assalamu alaikum, I'm wishing you peace. And so it really makes you, like, take a moment out of your life to look at another person and realize that this person is your brother, this person is your sister, no matter if you're related or not, where you're from, what your background is, that you and this person is another human being, and it makes you, like, realize that person's humanity. And so I think that you can't do justice to other people until you realize their humanity, and you realize like that person that you are talking about, that you're interacting with, is another human being just like you. And so until we can look at every single human being and look at them and realize that they're human beings who deserve every right that we have, we can't say that we are delivering justice and we live in the fair society. And I feel like that's something that needs to be stressed, especially in today's climate. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Corinne. I'm from Tufts Free Thought Society. I'll be reading the words of Dr. King on power, and in light of the recent Black Lives Matter movement and the deaths, Dr. King's ideas on power and love and the dichotomy that exists is incredibly relevant. Now we got to get this thing right. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. And this is what we must see as we move on. Now what has happened is that we've had it wrong and mixed up in our country. And this has led Negro Americans in the past to seek their goals through love and moral suasion devoid of power, and white Americans to seek their goals through power devoid of love and conscience. It is leading a few extremists today to advocate for Negroes the same destructive and conscienceless power that they have justly abhorred in whites. It is precisely this collision of a moral power with powerless morality which constitutes the major crisis of our times. Thank you.
All right, is this mic on? Good. All right. So my name is Raja Reed. I'm a member of the spoken word team at Tufts, and I'm going to be performing a poem for you all. I don't hate the wretched-looking white man who spat, "Move, niggers," at our sun-soaked bodies, though I did hate myself in the heat of that day for making sweat stick to the nape of my neck as I stood frozen with jaw clenched and fist loose. I hated the brown of my body in the way it soaks up so much sun and is never satisfied, in the way my black swallows her brown until we are both shadows to the light of white men, all silhouettes and all monolith. I wondered if her half-white resented the eclipse of my body, or if she missed their light in the comfort of half-white. I hated my gut for twisting until the shame made me double over and I forgot the beauty of our struggle. It took many nights of grief-induced fetal positioning until I remembered the beauty of our struggle. And the sun of my skin became enough light to satisfy me, and I'm still forgiving the paper-thin man, and I've forgotten his face, but not the way it crumpled like wet sheets. And sometimes I ask what made him hate the dark light of my skin. I wonder if it was poverty. Did it dip its noxious hands into his soul until it turned pale with spite for black? Did an empty stomach make him reach for a birchwood tree to shake with shame? And though I am no longer shaken with shame and have forgiven myself for not blackening his body, I wonder if my rage will boil over and strike the next white man who spits on my skin. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Alyssa, and this is John, and we are the co-presidents of the Catholic community at Tufts this year, and we're going to read a quote about love. "And I say to you, I have also decided to stick with love, for I know that love is ultimately the only answer to mankind's problems. And I'm going to talk about it everywhere I go. I know it isn't popular to talk about in some circles today. And I'm not talking about emotional bosh when I talk about love. I'm talking about a strong, demanding love. For I have seen too much hate. I've seen too much hate on the faces of sheriffs in the South. I've seen hate on the faces of too many Klansmen and too many white citizens counselors in the South to want to hate myself. Because every time I see it, I know that it does something to their faces and their personalities, and I say to myself that hate is too great a burden to bear. I have decided to love. If you are seeking the highest good, I think you can find it through love. And the beautiful thing is that we aren't moving wrong when we do it, because John was right. God is love. He who hates does not know God, but he who loves has the key that unlocks the door to the meaning of the ultimate reality."
When I read this quotation by the Reverend Dr, it called to mind an idea that many of us struggle with to this day, the connection between anger and love. Too often, the legacy we recall today has been whitewashed, in part by our church, by faces that look a lot like ours. Sanitized to appear less radical or contentious than it was back then and still is today. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy reminds us of the power of direct action, of taking controversial approaches to activism and harnessing the power of the many. In this way, King reminds us of another revolutionary whose history and legacy has also been whitewashed by faces like ours, Jesus. Jesus was a radical, and I often find myself reflecting on an image of an angry Jesus, flipping tables in the temple when bearing witness to injustice. Jesus flipped tables, and King sat at tables and counters where he wasn't allowed. At Jesus' table were prostitutes and lepers. At Martin's there were queers and trade unionists and radicals. They both relished in anger, and anger at injustice, at an imperfect world that both knew could be so much more. To us as Catholics, we often think of love in a one-dimensional way. It is patient, it is kind. Yes, it is those things, but it is so much more. It is fiery, it is passionate, it is angry. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. reminds us of love. In the face of racism and social inequality, he loved an angry love. And that is what I call to mind as a Catholic. Our history of Catholic social justice came from the margins of our religion and in many ways still remains there. but it reminds us that those hurt most by society need liberation from the chains of structural oppression. Martin Luther King Jr. and so many others lovingly showed us how to start breaking those chains, work that continues to this day. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Caitlin, and I'm also a member of the spoken word team at Tufts. And today I have a poem for you that's about the strong, demanding love that the movement is grounded in and fueled by, and also about the resistance and necessity of solidarity. In April of 1955, 29 African and Asian countries came together for the Bandung Conference, the first Afro-Asian meeting with all the new states to oppose colonialism by Western forces. What I mean is, I've never prayed for something as hard as I prayed for the revolution, but white men always got us grabbing at each other's necks. What I mean is, I'm sorry for all the shit I thought and said, and Mom, I don't blame you for our family inheriting anti-blackness. They drilled that into us, fighting over red apples. No, my people are not completely innocent. What I mean is, they used us to discipline black folks while scaring us into silence. They told us we could have the American dream, as long as we didn't get too close to militancy, so we believed them. What I mean is, they propped us up to try to gut the civil rights movement. I wish they had put Yuri Kochiyama in history books, so I would have known as a child that there was even a choice to stand by y'all. And history books never tell you Martin Luther King opposed the war in Vietnam, appropriating him into something a little easier to swallow. Our histories have been bleached. But yesterday, I saw a sign at a rally, Yellow Peril supports Black Power, just like photos from 1968. What I mean is, there are those who chain themselves to PVC tubes and federal building doors, 1,000-pound barrels in the middle of I-93, more often than not. There are those who say nothing at all, frightening radio silence. The system depends on them.
Hello, everyone. My name is JD, and I'll be reading the quote on action. And so this excerpt of Dr. King's speech comes from I've Been to the Mountaintop, which was delivered the night before he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. It's all right to talk about long white robes over yonder and all of its symbolism. But ultimately, people want some suits and dresses and shoes to wear down here. It's all right to talk about streets flowing with milk and honey, but God has commanded us to be concerned about the slums down here and his children who can't eat 3 square meals a day. It's all right to talk about the New Jerusalem, but one day, God's preacher must talk about the new New York, the new Atlanta, the new Philadelphia, the new Los Angeles, the new Memphis, Tennessee. This is what we have to do. So first I want to start off by saying, as some others have mentioned before me, that if we're being honest here, Dr. King's legacy has been sanitized for respectability's sake. Far too often we remember Dr. King as, that figure that was all about peace and all about nonviolence, which he absolutely was, but we often fail to acknowledge, if we know it all, that he was also dare I say, a radical towards his, his final few years of living on this earth. And for instance, in mainstream society, we're not taught that he spoke out against the triple evils that he described, racism, economic inequity, and militarism. Particularly, he was very opposed to the war in Vietnam. We're not taught that he called out the United States for being, and I quote, the greatest purveyor of violence today. And we know that he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, but we often fail to acknowledge that he was there to help lead a rally for unjustly treated sanitation workers. Similar to Dr. King, Jesus too was a radical, and he was a champion, if you will, for the poor and other marginalized groups of people. There's one Bible verse in particular that immediately comes to mind when I think of Jesus loving and supporting those who are deemed unworthy or less than. John chapter 3, verses 17 through 18, and it reads, "But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth." See, this Bible verse teaches me that God wants us not only to believe and say we will do good, but he actually wants us to do it, you know? It's okay for us to want to ascend to the kingdom of heaven, but we should be all about bringing that here now on earth and helping others now. Fellow human beings, no matter what race, ethnicity, religion, what other background they may have. Now, that is love, that is power, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is taking action now.
So I'm Antonia, and I'm also on the spoken word team. I wonder if Martin Luther King Jr. is the gatekeeper of the little slice of heaven reserved for Black people killed by the state. Does he share his job with Malcolm X, united in their death despite the dichotomy made of their lives? Do they aggressively fight to hold the gate shut as it flies open every 28 hours to welcome home another spirit? And they come flying in confused as to how they went from playing or walking, from living, to existing as a hashtag with wings, etched into the memories of all who loved them. How does he handle seeing them time and time again arrive? The expression on their faces going from confusion to sadness and realization that this is not a dream, but permanent. Does he have to pick up those that collapse, calling out their mother's names, mourning that they will be mourned, laying right outside of the gate, refusing to enter? Have his biceps grown used to the weight of carrying his dream deferred? Does he hold them in a hug after 50 years only able to mutter, "I'm sorry," into the ear of whoever is responsible for the tear stains on his shirt that day? Soon they will walk past him to be comforted by the ancestors. As he solemnly walks to close the gate, he knows that it's a futile act. He knows that he wants nothing more than to be unemployed. In the moment before he clicks the lock into place, does he cry, looking down, asking, "How many more? How many more will there be?"
Good evening, everyone. President Monaco, faculty, students, and staff. I bring you greetings from the Africana Center. This evening, we gave homage to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and legacy in celebration, a revolution of values, which I believe Dr. King would agree is still relevant today. Today, we enjoyed amazing musical and artistic talent by students who embraced Dr. King's vision for peace, poverty, power, love, and action. These performances were uplifting, reflective, and engaging, and gave pause to his struggle. Thank you for taking us along on a journey of freedom and justice through the lens of Dr. Martin Luther King's vision for this country. Thank you for the students who performed that. Additionally, I would like to recognize the Planning Committee. I would like to recognize Zachary, Jody, Reverend Greg McGonigal, Katrina Moore, and particularly the students that were involved. David, Douglas Brewster, Anicia, Miriam, Avia, and all who worked very, very hard in the programmatic efforts to make this event possible. Thank you so very much for all of your hard work and dedication. We really appreciate it. And also an earnest thanks to the University Chaplaincy, Reverend Greg McGonigal, and his staff for the success of this program. Did an outstanding job, and thank you as well. Just say, that deserves an applause. On behalf of the Office of the President, the University Chaplaincy, the Africana Center, the Multicultural Greek Council, Cape and Bible Study, and the Interfaith Student Council, we thank you for your attendance at this annual momentous occasion and all of the work that you have done in terms of making this event happening. I would like to just point out special thanks to Michael Bannon, to the College Transition Advisor team, Dr. Janet Hunt, Amber Rose, Linda Karpowicz, President Anthony Monaco, the Multi-Greek Council, S-Factor, and the student readers. Thank you so very much. In closing, I would like to leave you with a challenge to continue to make a positive difference in the lives that you touch every day. Additionally, I would like to read a quote that resonated with me from the words of Dr. Martin Luther King in the spirit of justice and freedom. Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Even a superficial look at history reveals that no social advance rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. The tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. Without persistent effort, time itself becomes an ally of the insurgent and primitive forces of irrational emotionalism and social deconstruction. This is no time to apathy or complacency. This is time for vigorous and positive action. Thank you all so very much.
So last night, many of us attended a powerful lecture by Dr. Cornel West of the Union Theological Seminary in New York on the theme of Black prophetic fire, the tradition that formed and inspired him, Dr. King, in his views and his values and his mission, that he exemplified in his own life and preaching and activism, and that has dwelled in many other figures, women and men, people of all genders and sexual orientations and abilities, people of all religious and secular orientations, a tradition that has found echoes in the social justice movements of people of all colors who make central to their lives the problems of human suffering and the calling to bring more justice and love into this world. The Black prophetic tradition and the prophetic tradition in general is a calling, not to tell the future, of course, but to be a mouthpiece for the sacred, for compassion and mercy and justice, for humaneness in all times and places, wherever structures and systems and practices of oppression and domination and exclusion and empire emerge. It places integrity and love at the center of the movement as the motivator for courage and resistance. Dr. West indicated that there are many issues that still face us in our society and world today that cry out for our choice to learn and serve and make change. Increasing and debilitating disparities in wealth and power, state violence and mass incarceration, the lack of basic needs such as healthcare, education, and the ability to make a living wage, racism, sexism, classism, ableism, queerphobia, xenophobia, religious and philosophical stereotypes, and domination and imperialism in any of the forms in which it emerges. Dr. West called each of us to find or rekindle in ourselves our fire as a calling and a vocation to address the moral and the spiritual issues that limit the well-being of the whole world. He called us to remember the Black prophetic tradition of King and related and intersecting traditions for well-being, peace, and empowerment, some of which we have considered tonight through spoken word, through music, through beautiful remarks. Dr. West suggested that we be mindful that we are fallible human beings who are seeking to advance the common good, and not to let our failings or limitations get in the way, but to allow them to be the bridge to one another and the power that comes through organizing together, people of all colors on fire for justice, hope, and love. He called us to living creatively, courageously, compassionately, and constructively in the face of catastrophe. He reminded all of us that our traditions and stories have something to offer. He invited us to join him in being prisoners of hope for transformation in what Dr. King would have called the beloved community. We want to end tonight with a brief candlelight vigil and a moment of silence, both to honor Dr. King and his sacrifice, as well as the women and men of the civil rights movement and related movements for justice and love, the cloud of witnesses that have gone before, and to remind ourselves that we are, each of us, that cloud of witnesses today for communities that need our fire and our passion. In a moment, we will light our candles for a moment of reflection together, which will conclude with the singing of the great freedom song, the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, which was beautifully introduced for us by S Factor tonight. And in this moment, I encourage all of us to think about the ways that we can make a difference, be part of a movement, be an ally to others. As Dr. King said, each of us can be great because each of us can serve. I invite you to stand for the candle lighting, please. just want to encourage us before we leave to take a look around and see the candles that each of us is holding, the light that each of us brings into this place, into this campus community, into the world in our different ways. My prayer is that Dr. King's vision and the vision of all the women and men, people of all genders who have come before us in civil rights and other movements will be our inspiration, finding the ways that we can serve the world and one another. One of the ways that you can do that, you may have noticed in your program, is that our MLK celebrations will continue by having a drive for homeless youth in the Boston area, especially through the AIDS Action Committee. In the next couple of weeks, there'll be collection boxes around the campus. We invite you, if you can, to drop some winter clothing in there, some notebooks. There are a number of things, first aid kits that have been requested by AIDS Action Committee and Youth on Fire. And we invite you to participate, if you can, in that service. If you can't give anything, there are other ways to be involved. Please let us know, and we'd be happy to find a way for you to be involved. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Good to be with you. Peace to you.